Welcome to our first webinar about using design thinking to reduce the project risk. This is extension of a talk we delivered during TechX conference in Olympia in February this year. So welcome everyone and let's get started. All right. So the plan for this session is to talk briefly about reasons why projects fail and how design thinking can help with that. I will give you a brief introduction to what design thinking is, and then I will talk you through how we at Kiliad use it to deliver design workshops. And finally, I will also show how we build that in our delivery process. Why project fails? We probably all of you experienced experienced the problem, and majority of reasons, or the biggest reason usually why project fail, is because of lack of requirement or insufficient requirement, or essentially not knowing what we are building. And this is a common problem. We spend months and months sometimes building requirements for big projects. I've seen personally the requirement building phase can take 4, 5, 6 months. And even then, the projects end up not delivering. So why is that happening? If we think about projects and products, there are three questions: what, why, and how. Now, over the last 20 years, the software industry focused mostly on how. We came with a lot of ideas, a lot of approaches, and a lot of techniques that helped us to deliver faster. Organizations started putting more and more effort on deliver. It doesn't matter what you deliver, but deliver. But in a way, we neglected the first two things. We neglected what and how. Sorry, what and why. We have project management, of course. We have lean startup approach that says figure out what user want. But again, even lean startup puts a lot of effort on the process and the deliver on the how part instead of why. So this is where the design thinking is coming. And design thinking is not a new thing. It exists for many, many years. And there are many, many tools in the toolbox. However, still that part is very, very much neglected. So what is design thinking? Design thinking is a iterative process of discovering what we are building and why we are doing it. In general, it starts from understanding, so learning about the user, observing them, seeing what they do, interviews, watching, defining their point of view, so synthesizing all that thing, and then creating ideas, building prototypes, and testing all those prototypes. Now you see there's a lot of arrows on this picture, and it's supposed to symbolize that this is not a step-by-step process. You can always go back, you can always iterate, go back, understand, observe, go back to understand, and so on. And this whole process is split into two parts. There's a problem space where we focus on understanding the problem. And once we are happy with that, we move into the solution space where we start building and designing the solution itself. In design thinking, the biggest difference is something that is often called the beginner's mindset. We ask questions like a child. We assume we don't know anything about the problem, about what we're building. We don't know. It's like thinking like a child or alien from outer space who can say, why do it this way? How does it work? And it often comes, the problem here comes from people who quite often are responsible for building requirements. They are subject matter experts. They know it very well. And they immediately assume that there's no need to asking those questions. And that's one of the reasons why quite often the requirements and the what and why doesn't really match what the user wants, because they are such expert, they don't even go back and they don't think. So this beginner's mind, this child mindset is one of the most important things in the design thinking. So in practice, how does it look like? The format, usually it's a workshop or some sort of session. In terms of location, the best is to do it in person, obviously, if you can, if not online. And when it comes to duration, anything from just a few hours to 5 days. Now, 5 days, that's quite often called design sprints, and getting 5-day workshop in organization those days is very difficult. I honestly can't imagine, especially higher and more senior people, getting them for 5 days just to talk about project. That's going to be difficult. So typically, at least from our experience, between 1 and 2 days, that's kind of a sweet spot. So how do we do it? This is how when we do those workshops, how we structure them. We start from understanding. You see, comparing to the previous picture, we are not using every single part. We start from understanding, so discovering users, discovering customers, who they are, what they want, what are their problems. Then, if possible, the observe part, that is, depending if we can, we try to talk to users, try to see how they work, understand their needs more directly. Then we move to defining, so synthesizing all findings, putting everything in together to clarify the problem, and finally generating the solution, if possible, prototype, if not, at least just plan. So the first step is to understand for us. So here we want to learn more about our users, about our customers. We want to know who they are, what problems they are facing, what are their needs, what they are trying to solve, what they are trying to do. Design thinking has a lot of different tools. Depends on a toolkit you are looking at, probably 40 to 50 different techniques and tools. So our favorite picks are here. Stakeholder maps is where we look at who is in any way involved with the project, with the solution we are looking at. Even remotely, just seeing on a background, watching it, not necessarily using it. We look at tools like jobs to be done, where we analyze what tasks the user do, problem statements, and of course, interviews if possible. At the end of this part, we end up with stakeholder map that we can segment, and we know who is going to be involved in the solution. The second step is to observe. This is where we start building empathy with users. This is when we start discovering their pains, their needs, and the way they look at the problems. So we try to interview them. We try to watch them if possible. That is not always possible. Not always we have, or you will have, access to actual real users. Sometimes you need to just put yourself in their shoes. So this is where we start creating empathy maps. Empathy maps is a tool that allows to put ourselves in a shoe or in a mind of a user. We think about what they think, what they see, what influences them, what they say, what are their problems, what are their needs, and so on. From that, we usually create personas. persona is a representation of this fictional user as rich as possible. We give them names, we give them their life history, job titles, family, hobbies, where they live, what they do, how they spend weekends. We try to make them like someone we know, like someone you would introduce to your friend. And finally, we also create journey map. This is where we start looking how those users are going to solve the problem, what steps they are taking, what should be their journey through the system. At the end of this phase, we end up with a set of personas, of course, journey maps, and so on. From there, because this moment we may have 5, sometimes even more different personas, we need to put it all together. We need somehow systematize and collect all this information in one place. This is where we start looking at things like storytellings, 2x2 matrix, lean canvas, and so on, where we can put all those different people, all the different personas, and collect their needs, figure out which are the most common, which are the most important needs and problems, which are those that's going to stretch across the multiple users. From that, we will have a prioritized list of them, and we can finally start talking about the solution. This is where we now start finally thinking about the solution, start finally thinking, what are we actually building? Because so far, until now, we only thought and focused on the problem. We didn't even think about the solution yet. So now it's time to move to the solution space and start thinking about the solution. Our favorite tool, at least my favorite tool here, is Value Proposition Canvas. It allows us to map the pains and the needs, the problems of the users that we got from the previous steps onto actual features of the product. And it's really nice format where we can directly see which feature of the product solves which problem or addresses which need. From there, it's relatively easy to prioritize it and start developing a business development plan and backlog. And that's the biggest outcome of this phase, which is the plan to develop the product and the backlog. With that, we can start building. Now, Tina, you asked, from what I remember, how we build that into the whole process, how down the line we ensure that we still do the right thing. So this is how we use it. Our process starts from the left side, from designing, and then once we move to the right side, when we start delivering, we always have an option to go back to the design and going into more detail. So this is where we start. We start from all those 4 phases, usually a workshop, usually 1 to 2 days to design the solution, to design the backlog. When we start the project, this will be longer. This may be 2 days. Later during the project, when we need to understand the next feature, the next thing, it can be shorter. It can be just a few hour-long session. It can be sort of release planning, feature planning. It doesn't matter how you call it, but essentially that's the point behind it. The outcomes that we have, like I already said before, user journey, story maps, value stream mapping, backlog, and so on. Then we do delivery. This is already well known to everyone in software. Any sort of iterative methods of Scrum, Kanban, whatever you want to use, on essentially building it in iterations. But the key point is that at end of every iteration, at end of every cycle, we ask ourselves, are we building still the right thing? Has any changed? Where's that change in priorities? Was there change in user requirements? Some new information came. So can we start the next iteration, or do we need to go back? And if we need to go back, I need to go back this way. If we need to go back, we go back to the left part. We go through all those 4 steps of understanding, observing, defining, and then creating the idea, and back to development. So I hope, Tina, that answers your question, how we ensure that down the line we still do the right thing. So that's essentially how we do it, how we bring design thinking into our process.
Yes, hi Jimmy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Hello, so that works. Thank you for that overview. That was really useful and insightful. I was just wondering, I'm working on a project where the content that we're trying to capture in an application is, or the capability, I should say, is vast. We're looking to develop a portal, and I was just wondering if there are any tools that you would recommend that sort of help us capture that landscape. I'm sort of struggling to get my head around. There is going to be so many use cases and user personas. You know, I can see what you've sort of described as fairly easy if it's a very particular thing that you may be trying to develop. But if it's something that's really vast and meant to capture lots of different things and functionality, and I need to develop a content strategy and what will feed into the portal, this is what I'm sort of struggling currently in. I guess the design phase is there's so many stakeholders, you know, you can't just capture it with one workshop. Yeah. Is there anything from your experience that would help how you would approach something that's really big and complex?
Yes. Like with the story, how do you eat elephant one bite at a time? So I would say the best would be, in my opinion at least, so what I would try to start from mapping all stakeholders. So all those different users, different consumers, and so on, put them on a one big canvas, where normally the way we do it is we, on a grid, we put them in a sort of how close and how involved they are with the solution, with the product. And the further from the center are, the less, more sort of on a passive observer. The closer they are, the more directly involved. With that, then I would start prioritizing them, put them on 2 axes. The axes could be depending on your need, but for example, one could be how important they are. The second could be how critical for the business they are, and so on, and prioritize them in this way. That should give you basically a ranking, which of those personas are the most critical, and those you should start with. Because like I said, you cannot create profiles for 50 different personas. That's just, you will spend weeks and weeks trying to do it. So there is a way of finding the first one, the key ones. Then you build something for them, and then you repeat the process. You go back, essentially, after you finish building something, you go back, say, okay, who is next? What is the next feature? Who is that feature for? Which persona? Bring that, analyze, and go back to building. So you essentially build incrementally.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Jeff, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. I finally got my mic enabled. I logged out and came back in to make it work. I was interested, have you seen people using AI to produce artificially, so to speak, personas?
Yes.
What do you
yes.
think about that?
Like everything with AI, The way I see it is it will be relatively generic, because the way especially generative AI gets information, it will be generic, right?
Yep.
If you are building something very, very specific, I know what you are building, so I could use your example. But let's say, we are building, I don't know, a tool to sort of an Uber thing, right? So you could use generative AI to figure out a persona, but that would be a persona of a very specific certain person, very generic, let's say, rider persona, right?
Yeah.
You could try then to narrow it. Okay, what would be the persona of a rider in, let's say, I don't know, Mexico or London? There could be differences, right? But if your tool, if what you're building is something slightly more specific, for example, you start building sort of, luxury Uber. Okay, let's imagine, limousines and that kind of things. You want to start dig deeper into people who would be clients here. AI can help you, but much better would be to actually, I know a CEO of some company, and I know this is what he is looking for.
Yeah.
So it's always better to use your own judgment. I guess you can use AI to get started or get generic things, but the risk is we tend to rely on it so much now that it can start creating very generic thing. And I probably know what kind of person that you are thinking about.
Yeah, look, it's a good answer. I do get concerned that sometimes people think it speeds up the design process, but I'm not sure it necessarily picks out the right pain point. And
No.
that does require good listening skills. And I think you showed an iterative process there, and I don't think AI will help me differentiate the solution at the end of the day.
No, I don't think it will. It may help the process. Definitely, it may help the process, right?
Yeah.
The way I probably would say use it would be more sort of on a validation level, show persona to AI and say, okay, what do you think, right? Give me opinion, criticism, whatever, something like that. But in the end, you are behind the solution. You talk to people, you are much better positioned to put yourself in their shoes than AI can do. Yes, you raised a hand.
Yes, I just wanted to add to that. I think the risk with using AI, and something I know from my experience of using AI, is sometimes it gives you the answer, but then unless it's something very generic that is more of a box ticking exercise on building something like a persona, you miss that empathy part of it, which AI just can't do. And it's sometimes those things that you have to do as a human being, go through that process of, okay, what's my persona's pain because of this? There are certain emotions that could lead to certain aspects of the persona that AI won't pick up. So that's just my 2 pence worth. And I think because it's so important to the product, it's always better to put yourself in your persona's shoes.
Any other question, thoughts, comments? Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, please reach out to us. And otherwise, everyone have a great day, and hopefully see you on the next one.